Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
There is something to be said about finding serious people to facilitate a serious dialogue to address serious issues. Welcome again to the Carolinas Conversation about current business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and this week, as well as each time on CBR, we hope to bring a non-inflammatory, intelligent discussion about the issues that really, truly do matter to all of our communities. Coming up, what is going on now, and how does education, innovation, and things related determine our future? Later on, returning special guest UNC SA Chancellor John Mauceri.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded November 4th, 2011. On this week's program, Dr. John Connaughton of UNC Charlotte, Dr. Imtiaz Haque of Clemson University, and special guest John Mauceri, Chancellor of the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. Now, Chris William.
John, Imtiaz, welcome to the program. Good to have you both here. We're just chatting before the program, as we always do. John, let me come to you, because this employment number, whatever it is, tell us, what are we looking for in employment? What are we looking for in unemployment? And what is the underlying dialogue that never really quite makes it past what media headlines say?
Yeah. I think that we have to put this in perspective. During the Great Recession of 08 and 09, during that 25-month period where we were losing jobs, we lost over 8 million jobs. So far in the last almost 2 years, it's been about 21 months, we managed to add back just about 2 million of those jobs, somewhere around 25%. And we've been doing it recently in monthly job numbers somewhere in the 100,000 range. This month's job number was 80,000. It's not very good, to be honest with you. We need to be producing 250, 300,000 jobs a month in order to feel like we're in a recovery. At this pace, 80,000, 100,000 jobs, it's another 4 or 5 years before we get back to still 6 million jobs that we haven't replaced yet from the recession. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that we have an anemic jobs number where we added 80,000 jobs, yet at the same time the unemployment rate drops from 9.1 to 9%. Now, the only way that can happen is if people are leaving the labor force. So you've got two things going on. One, the economy is not doing a tremendous job producing jobs right now. But secondly, we have a tremendous number of Americans who are just becoming totally discouraged and dropping out of the job market completely. And you know, that's probably more problematic than the pace of job growth, is the fact that a lot of people are becoming disillusioned in their ability, or the ability of the economy to produce jobs for them going forward.
Imtiaz, how do you characterize what we've been talking about?
You know, Chris, for us, it's our measure is where our graduates are going. You know, so I'm in a graduate school, and the job market in the technical areas, I think, is picking up. Our students don't seem to be having any trouble finding jobs. So I think in some areas you have, you know, serious problems, but in other areas I think things are starting to pick up.
You know, I want to steal a question that you had for John when we were in the green room before the taping of the program. John, I guess the question is, if these people are just dropping out and giving up and saying, I'm not going to look for a job, and their unemployment benefits run out, what happens to them? Because let me say that the agencies and the nonprofits that typically have been the safety net and the last resort, those are going away too.
Mm-hmm. there still are some safety nets out there. Obviously, food stamps still exist as a program. Medicaid still exists as a backup medical program. And so what's happening is people's unemployment benefits do run out, and there is a limit to that. Rather than to continue looking for work, which they're required to do while they're receiving unemployment benefits, they just pack it in, basically. One of the things that we're not 100% sure of, but we have a feeling is taking place, is that we're developing a very big underground economy where people are essentially officially dropping out of the labor force because they're not actively looking for work, but at the same time they're working under the table a day here, a day there for cash that's not being reported. And that obviously doesn't produce the kind of income that a full-time job would provide. But I think at a certain point in time, what we know for a fact is that people get very, very discouraged about looking for work and not finding work after 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years. It becomes very emotionally troubling to them to continue to go beat their head against the wall.
So how big can this black market underground economy, the way, you know, the cash payment, I mean, it's always been there, but I mean, how big can this become? Or is it just an anomaly based on the times?
I think it's an anomaly based on the times, but in some countries it's very, very large. Not historically, not in the United States, but in a lot of countries it is very, very large. I mean, Greece is a prime example. I'm not to use them as they're a poster child for about everything, but you know, they do have a very large underground economy.
Imtiaz, you're nodding as if you agree.
Well, I think so. Yeah, you know, coming from a third world country, I can tell you that's the norm out there. that's the economy in those countries. You know,
let's go something specific to what you do at ICAR in the upstate of South Carolina. Since the Carroll Campbell days, this thing has proved to be such a win for South Carolina and the Southeast. And now you've got downstate, you've got, or what you all call the low country, sorry. In the low country, you've got Boeing, and you've got a lot of momentum going there. How is there some possibility that the aviation cluster could continue to move out up toward the upstate, and that become also kind of a center of influence and a core for that?
Absolutely. I think, you know, what we haven't seen with Boeing yet is that suppliers moving in. So Boeing is a major, major corporation. And with that major corporation are going to come people that are going to want to be close to where the product is being produced. We actually saw that with BMW. When BMW came in, brought with it a whole bunch of suppliers, and now the upstate is a booming automotive cluster. You know, has a lot of companies. Just in a 10-county region that I'm in the part of, we have approximately 120 suppliers in there.
Do you have the kind of labor that you need in the upstate to fill those jobs?
Well, I think so. I think those companies are still coming, but we do hear a lot from them on needing people that are trained a bit differently. Actually, that's the impetus for creating the ICAR Center. The impetus was to create a workforce that actually could do the kinds of things that we're seeing in the product, you know, the changes that we see in the product. So I think the workforce is there. I think the technical schools, the training programs in the technical schools are very, very good, very strong. And we're working with them very closely. The university is working with them very closely. We've just received a $2.5 million grant from the National Science Foundation to work with the technical schools to create training programs which actually fit this new generation of vehicles and aircraft that are coming about now. So I think so. I think the possibilities, Boeing is going to have a huge impact, not just in South Carolina. I think that impact is going to go into the region. So,
John, I'm going to give you the last minute here before we bring our guest out and take the risk of throwing gasoline on this with you. Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Charlotte, Occupy Raleigh, take your pick. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think it's frustration. I mean, I think when we talked earlier about this idea of people dropping out of the labor force and going to the underground economy, I think this is another manifestation of that frustration that the economy is not working for people.
But do you think it's a catch-all for anyone that's frustrated with any aspect, whether they can't find a job, whether they haven't been able to get a benefit, whether they have a problem with their parent? That's not fair to say, but do you think it's a catch-all for that type of frustration?
It can be, but I think that if you look back at other economic times when we've had trouble, we've seen the same kind of thing take place. Great Depression, we had the Hooverville with the veterans looking for their World War I payments a little early, and that didn't work out so well. But I think the problem with the Occupy Wall Street crowd is I think they're focused on the wrong problem. They're focused on the banks as being the root of the problem, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. I can go through the list of statistics here to demonstrate that, but suffices to say that the problem has really been in what's been going on in government and simply their inability to try to move the country forward, in my estimation. That the equal blame goes to Democrats and Republicans in that. If you looked at the fiasco we had this summer around the debt ceiling crisis, and if you look at the economic numbers during that month and immediately after, you realize that kind of circus has an impact on not putting confidence in both businesses, consumers, et cetera, going forward.
Agreed. Now, I truly wish we had more time to carve that out. We're talking about education. We're talking about innovation. We'll continue that with our guest in a moment. There's an interesting challenge going on with the UNC System's Queen City campus. Next week on this program, we will have the Chancellor of UNC Charlotte, Dr. Phil Dubois, will be here to talk about, among many things, certainly the addition of a football program in a very interesting time, or certainly a very interesting economy. And then in 2 weeks, Anita Zucker from Charleston-based Intertech Group will be here as well. Our guest may have an uncharacteristic CV for any business/education CEO, winning many accolades, including Grammy, Tony, Emmy Awards, conducting or directing many of the world's most prominent symphony orchestras and operas, director of the Hollywood Bowl, just to name a very few of his passions and honors. Joining us again is the Chancellor of the UNC School of the Arts, John Mauceri. Maestro, welcome to the program.
Good to be here again.
Thank you.
As always.
Thank you. It is good to have you here. John, you've heard some of the dialogue here, so let's kind of just launch into, you have specific ideas on how education, as a matter of fact, let me say this, and I don't know that you'd remember this, but a couple years ago you said to me, an MFA is at least as equally as important as an MBA.
Yeah, I think that people are understanding that creative problem solving is at the heart of the vitality of any institution, any organization. And one of the things that we do at UNCSA is teach kids problem solving, creative problem solving. So a lot of our alums, not the majority of them, do not actually pursue careers in the performing arts, and they find themselves, for example, the head of the medical facilities at Yale University is headed by a man who was a horn major at the School of the Arts. And not to pick on Yale University, but the associate dean of graduate education there was a flute player from our school. So what we find is that part of what happens is the kids who come to our school already have committed to an instrument, to ballet, to whatever it is that they do. And then when they project that into their lives and their futures, they find that they are really good at solving problems. Because, artists are can-do people, so the show always goes on. You have all these issues of, you're always not ready, let's face it.
Tough budgets.
And you never have enough money. You never have. I like to use the image of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel because he needed to have this special blue paint, otherwise he couldn't do it, and the Pope refused to give him the blue paint. And so what did Michelangelo do? He painted a masterpiece. He only got the blue paint 2 popes later when he did the other part of that chapel. But really, the actual thing is he just had to figure out the way to do it, and figure out a way to do it to transcend the limitations of the conditions.
John.
I suspect most citizens of North Carolina are probably unaware that the School of the Arts is one of the 16 campuses in the UNC system. 2 questions. One, how many other states have a public School of the Arts? And then secondly, about how big are you? How many students?
Well, the first one is easy to answer. Nobody. So it is one of the
very unique situation.
Well, if you want to put very in front of unique, I think unique is probably sufficient. That's part of the issue here, is that when you talk about the School of the Arts, there's so many parts of it that are unique that people just sort of like their eyes roll around their heads. First of all, it's the smallest school in the system. It accounts for 0.5% of the population of the system, right? So it's really small. It's the only school that has a high school component as well as college and graduate school, right? It's also a vocational school because it's actually training people for jobs. This is not necessarily the goal of most universities. We never actually get to the question of why do we have a university system. I mean, that would be a really good question. I mean, we all believe in it. I think we all believe in it, and I, as an adopted son now of North Carolina, love the fact that this state committed to higher education in 1789. I mean, George Washington was president, and the good people of North Carolina committed to a school, open to the public, which is free or as close to free as possible. But the thing about our school is that it's actually training people for jobs. We know that the person who's learning how to do rigging in the design and production school is going to get a job rigging, and we know that the violinist is being trained for them. Now, the second part of your second question is that we are really small, and so the answer is there's a total of about 1,100 students. 300 are high school, and the rest are college and a small graduate component. We really have about 925 paying students because in North Carolina, if you're a resident and you're going to high school in our school, you go for free, which is, again, miraculous.
John, I share your thoughts on the importance of the arts because it's not just the flute player, but it's also the interface with engineering, with science, with so many other disciplines. I think to make society whole, you have to have all these pieces. And if you don't have these pieces, you take something very elemental out of society. So I totally agree with you on that. My question is, in these times when things are so tough for schools, for the states, and public school systems are really under duress, they are, universities, school systems, whatever, K through 12, whatever. What can we do that ensures that we are going to keep these kinds of things in play? How are we going to do that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, at School of the Arts, the business model in the past had always been one, beg. And we thought that the begging model was not actually a viable way to go forward. And so we're actually looking at sustainability models, looking at the school from a business point of view to find out whether the school is too small to be efficient. We know that there are certain aspects of a school that cannot be cut anymore because the functionality disappears. You can't do it. So while we are a conservatory, and that means for people who are listening to this and might not understand that, is that the hands-on teaching of the mentor with the mentee, the sorcerer and the apprentices, is more like in a medical school. Mm-hmm. And actually that's the other analogy we use for our school because it's like that. It's a school of excellence, and you have to have the mentor be an expert specifically in that part of the arts that this person's teaching. Mm-hmm. So the trombone teacher cannot teach flute, but at the same time cannot teach wig making. But the bottom line is this, this is the irony of these conversations. Our school has suffered like every school, but we've been cut about $10 million recurring over the past 12 years. At the same time, the school, of course, it had to survive, and it does survive. It still does 300 performances a year with this little school, which is more than one a day if you look at the actual length and size of an academic year. So we're always succeeding and always claiming poverty so that the stuff doesn't compute. Because artists always try to solve the problem. The curtain does go up. And our issue here is that we don't ever want to discourage our students from figuring it out. 2 years ago when we had no money to build scenery, we ran out of scenery, one of our faculty members gave up the tree in his backyard. And the kids sawed down the tree and used the wood to build the scenery. Now, in reality, in the world of professional arts, whatever that is, and it could be a children's theater in Winston-Salem or it could be Broadway, you never get what you want, just like Michelangelo and the blue paint. So we're teaching this kind of, flexibility and viability. At the same time, we do feel right now that we are at the brink of not being able to keep this going. I used to say we pulled the rabbit out of the hat, but now the hat is being taken away from us. And so that's where we see that where we are is not sustainable. So we are looking at certain models, which would be to increase enrollment in some of the schools, which basically would make the school run better. See, the school is music, dance, drama, filmmaking, and design and production. All of those 5 conservatories feed each other. You can't put on a play without the wig on the actress and the lighting. There's always background music. You can't put the ballet on without, again, the wig and the costume, but also the music. So all of these elements, I always felt, were imbalanced to begin with. So we need to make maybe the music a little bigger, maybe keep drama the way it is, so we get the inner part of it working. Now, that will increase enrollment to some extent. We can't make it gigantic, otherwise we won't have this same kind of school. But we could increase, And as everybody knows, each student is worth a certain amount of money, right? We get the state money for that. Then we also look at what we're charging for tuition. And when you compare our school to peer groups, and it's very hard to find any peer groups, so you have to have a peer in drama and a peer in filmmaking, because there is no school in the world that is this school. And when I say that, people say, what is he talking about? Well, it's a standalone university. It stands alone, and every student is an artist. I mean, and we give them degrees. I mean, they get their bachelor's degree, they get their high school degree. So it's not like we're just, playing in the woods and putting on plays. We actually, so those kids start in the morning with their academics, have lunch, learn their art, whatever, and their technique, and in the evening they're rehearsing or they're performing, which means there's an extra 50% requirement on those students' lives. So this idea, which is one of the great, I mean, it's an idea that almost the Greeks would have come up with, a community of artists. And my fantasy would be to, once we get that balance worked out, to take the idea and put it in West Africa, take the idea and put it in Shanghai. I think about what would West African kids, if they had a school like the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, what would those African filmmakers and African musicians and African dancers and what would they create for us? Now, this is almost like a Peace Corps of the arts. This is a way of continuing the cultural legacy of the world. And that's why in one hand, I don't think it will ever go away, because it's who we are as humans. On the other hand, we can make it so hard for it to exist on an excellent level that it would become mediocre, and that would be a tragedy.
So John, not to interrupt you, but when Tom Ross sat in that chair just a few short months ago, the president of the UNC system, and voiced some frustration about the budget was being cut for the system at a time when we should precisely be doing the opposite thing. But you come at it from a different standpoint. Do you share his frustration on the budget as just raw frustration about budgets being cut into education, or is there another way here that a school, as small as it might be within the UNC system, could be the lead on thinking about education and the funding of education differently?
You're exactly right. I do not want to contradict Tom's frustration, because it is palpable. Every day I get on the phone and call an office and the phone doesn't get picked up. It kills me, because we're below efficiency and we're down to deficiency. On the other hand, because we're small, and this offers an alternative to the model of big. I mean, we, as a public university system, of course we want every student interested in higher education to come. But as schools get to be 30,000 student big, and we are 1/30th that size, there is an environment of a smaller school that saves students' lives who would be lost in the 30,000 student arena. I know I would have been. And so I see a kid, I use him as an example. He was a freshman in high school last year. He's from Georgia. He's a harp player, a boy harp player from Georgia. And I think of just how much stress could be put on him in a regular high school. And he's a hero in our school. And he's a great artist. There's a woman in the North Carolina Symphony who's in her 60s who told me that she's played in the North Carolina Symphony for 50 years, and she said the school saved her life. So we can offer an alternative to the model of education and also survival. And I think we can. I'll give you another example. A few years ago, Erskine Bowles was talking about the large Hispanic population that's moving through the state of North Carolina, and will the university system be ready, and how do we best serve those kids when they're ready for college? And I looked at it, I said, that's simple. We're going to be doing plays in Spanish and in English, the same play. We're going to have different dance. We're going to teach dance, and we'll probably have, we're going to do that. And there's going to be, the guitar program is probably going to get gigantic. Because you tell me you've got 30,000 Asian kids coming in. I said, that's great, bring them in, because we can adapt. And I do think we can take a leadership role in offering creative solutions to the larger problem.
I hate that has to be the last word, but that literally, that's our program. And we just scratched the surface. Please come back. I know I say this to you every single time, but please come back, because we really want to talk about the details of the creativity part of that.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm so glad to be here again.
Always
and
nice
with
to
these
see you.
Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Imtiaz, welcome. Good to have you here. Representing
so much.
ICARV here. I know things are running on all 8 cylinders, no pun intended up there.
Thank you.
It's good to see. And John, and I say this to him every time, the very first guest on our very first program 20 years ago, and he still looks
Okay.
relatively good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alive. I'm alive. That's good enough.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. We certainly hope your business is good. Have a nice weekend. Good night.
Thank you.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.